I think just start by introducing yourselves and a little bit of the background of what your firm's ideas are this time, and then we'll segue into some questions. So start with Joshua.
Thanks, yeah. Can you guys all hear me? My name is Joshua Kauffman. I'm a general partner of a early stage investing company called Wisdom. You can check it out at wisdom.vc. And Wisdom is invested in teams that are helping people live with wisdom at every life stage. So we've looked at fetal monitoring technologies, we've looked at geriatric technologies, and everything in between. We're agnostic with regard to life stage, but we're certainly not agnostic when it comes to helping people live with judgment and wisdom wherever they might be in their lives. Hence why intelligent assistants and chatbots are super interesting to us. Because throughout our lives, we might be lonely, we might need help, we might need reflection, we might need perspective, and there might not be the right person there at exactly the right moment. That's where this technology can come in. That gives you a bit of a sense of what we're up to. Aside from that, we are broadly investors in fintech, edtech, VR, AR, and also looking a lot at the microbiome these days.
Cool. So in a way, would you regard intelligent assistants or the chatbots as a horizontal across those, or?
Anytime a human needs a relationship and a person isn't there, there's an opportunity for a chatbot to fill itself in.
Okay.
I think that when humans are on this planet in some years' time with a whole lot more technology, we're going to be finding that our ultimate purpose is to be having conversations with each other, in addition to creativity and other things. So there's a lot of conversation that can't happen with chatbots and intelligent assistants. Most of that is through actual sharing of stakes that you have with another person because of a blood relation, because you live in the same geography, because you share things which are actually scarce. But for all those other things, the chatbot is potentially a really interesting way of engaging.
And then Sarah, a little background on yourself and Greylock and position.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Gua. I am a principal at Greylock Partners. We are an early-stage technology-focused venture firm here in Silicon Valley. We've been around for 52 years. I've been at the firm for about 3.5, so I won't take credit for that. We basically do two things at Greylock, software for businesses and internet software for consumers, though I would also say almost all software is internet software at this point. We've had the privilege of being in business with some really fantastic entrepreneurs and having successes on both sides that, again, I won't take credit for, but things like Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram on the consumer side, and Palo Alto Networks and ServiceNow and Workday on the enterprise side. We have not traditionally ventured too far outside the zone of things that we think we understand personally. So I think there's so much opportunity in health, for example, or energy. We don't really do that. We will do the pieces that touch that we actually understand. So, for example, if you are selling software to a business to reduce their cost, a self-insured employer to reduce their cost of healthcare with data analytics, we could look at that. We probably wouldn't look at new drugs. In this space, it's pretty interesting. Like, we have been thinking about intelligence and automation as it relates to better user experiences or new enterprise software for the last few years, and so made a few exploratory investments in this vein, both one-to-one consumer services delivered in a messaging format. So, for example, we made a seed investment called Rise several years ago that was a nutritionist on demand through text. That company is now part of One Medical, if anybody's heard of that. It's popular in the Bay Area. To a large series of investments in more recent times, ranging from Oslo, which is a personal assistant that helps you find things locally. So if you want to get dinner and a movie, they can actually help you do that from mobile in a really smart way, to things like Operator, which are a combination of actual experts, human experts, and chatbots and intelligence to help you shop, to other things that we're not talking about yet. But yeah, love to learn from all of you here and talk about what we're thinking about in this space. I think it's an area of large opportunity.
Thank you. And hello. So we're just doing intros and a little background on your firm and maybe some thoughts on what you're investing in the area of intelligent assistance.
Sure. Well, my name is Phil Libin. I'm a managing director at General Catalyst. Next week is my 1-year anniversary of being a VC. So I still know almost nothing, least experienced person probably in this room for investors. Before that, I was running Evernote. So most of my background is in operating startups and companies. I'm focusing on AI and bots. I've made 5 bot investments in the past year. All pretty small, kind of ranging in seed stage, so ranging in size from about $500,000 to about $3 million. And I'm super optimistic about the bot space. Plan to make a bunch more investments, start a few companies in the bot space and hatch them. And I think as time goes on, these will go from seed stage to A rounds and B rounds and later.
Sounds very promising. So I'm going to target Sarah with this first question because over the we're in the closing stages of our day and a half conference, but what came up very early, because Opus has always framed this as conversational commerce going back like 10 years, and then that phrase just reemerged as meaning bots on messaging platforms, and we've been discussing how some of those bots are clearly not. They're sort of task-specific, they're not very conversational, they're sort of one and done. And I'm wondering if you're seeing the same sort of dichotomy, that there's sort of minimalist, non-conversational bots out there, and that there's also some investment going on, as you heard in the last panel, into knowledge management and all sorts of deep neural networking technologies.
Yeah, it's really interesting to talk. It's hard to talk about this area because it's a whole bunch of different opportunities, right? And so we are very use case driven at Greylock, and it's all about the value of the use case when we're thinking about a new startup. And so we see opportunities using, AI, NLP technologies, knowledge graph technologies in everything from a deeply contextual bot that actually offers like a stateful conversation to a consumer, or analyzes your knowledge corpus and does something with it within your enterprise, like maybe reads all your email or your Slack and tells you who you should talk to about a particular issue. But I think that we're going to see a lot of things that are much more utility oriented. And I actually think that there's a lot of opportunity for traditional businesses or businesses that haven't really invested in, for example, successful mobile native apps to take advantage of these platforms, because they're a new distribution channel, and their theoretical benefit is that you both get this massive installed base. So, call it 700 million people on WeChat, 1 billion people on Messenger, Line also having a really large customer base. These are people who have this messaging communications platform installed on their phone with push notifications generally turned on, right? And like if you can reach your consumers or your employees or anybody else you need to through that platform without making them install some heavy application, like that's really attractive for a whole bunch of use cases that may or may not be relevant to us. I personally think that there's also opportunities enabling what you say might be just utility conversations or broadcast conversations and helping traditional businesses do that, but I think there's a spectrum of different use cases here, and it's not just the ones that look like some full human AI conversation that are interesting.
Anybody else want to chime in on that? Okay. So there's this existential question here too. Then that are these bots replacing people in some sense, or are they indeed, are they indeed augmenting our own intelligence and our ability to do stuff? And I'll direct this at Joshua, because we're watching. I mean, like the last panel, they all characterized it as emerging technologies, and clearly all technologies are emerging, but we're at a stage here where we've kind of observed that we have assistants moving to advisors. We're seeing those resources that are doing the analytics moving from descriptive to predictive and then on to prescriptive. And I'm just wondering, where you see they are on some sort of continuum and what makes sense to invest in it at this point.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing you said, our biggest social anxieties, and just think about your own social anxieties, most of them are related to not knowing how intimate we really are with the people around us. That's something that can be codified inside of an artificial intelligence environment. You and I have talked in the past about some of my theories and the ones that guide wisdom with regard to investing in chatbots, or as Sarah pointed out, it's actually a whole basket of technologies that we haven't really found the right hat to hang on yet. We're mostly interested in how these will not be interlocutors, literally people you talk with or entities that you have discourse with, but how these become your audience. We think that the greatest human fear is invisibility. We think that that's the motivator for why people use social technologies the way that they do. And we think that ultimately it's having witnesses and having an audience that is our underlying motivation. And we think that that's a good motivation because your witnesses and your audience has the capacity to shape who you are, has the capacity to steer you in a positive direction. And so we're interested in this burgeoning new crop of post-advisor, audience, witness, maybe even mirrors that help to give you a bit of reflection about who you are and how you're governing yourself and give you clues as to how you can grow. And this will help us break out of the homophily, literally the echo chambers that have traditionally governed how social media works, and help us to grow by pushing us incrementally in ways that we might prescribe, others might prescribe, or frankly, medical practitioners might prescribe, or might come with just pure serendipity. And I was just coming in here, I was talking to Phil, and then I had a thought about a company that I once knew very well called Coco. Does anybody know Coco? It's Coco.com. I got one hand in the back. It's not a plug for them by any means, but I just wanted to animate one of the dynamics in here. They started off as a cognitive behavioral therapy app, a platform whereby people could help each other think through whatever's going on in their lives. And they pivoted. And they used everything they knew from having people talk to each other to teach computation how to have empathy. So they're actually taking the human language of emotions in order to make chatbots more emotional in the run-up to this moment when they're going to be our audience in a way that becomes credible.
Yeah, and I just want to point out that in the discussion we've been having about metabots being, sort of the entity that resides on the thing you're carrying around, and it's the first thing you talk to, and it's the bot that sort of aggregates your other bot. And the idea that there's investment by individual brands or enterprises to deliver messages or support that sounds like an interesting middle ground. It's not a hierarchy. It's sort of like the bot crowdsourcing kind of model, and it's an interesting thing to fill out.
Yeah, I think a lot of the discovery models that we had with apps are going to have to change. But ultimately, I don't think it's that complicated. In many ways, bots are kind of somewhere halfway between apps and people.
Yeah.
And so if you think about how do you discover people? Well, people get famous. How do people get famous? I think bots are going to get famous the same way. So there will be famous bots, and they got to be famous by doing something notable, or being in the right place at the right time, or being around the right kinds of people or other bots. And a lot of the tools that make people famous now, I think, will make bot famous, and discovery will move into more of that direction. But I think a lot of people are just kind of overthinking this.
I'll number among those.
There's been a lot of complaining about how the app metaphor is broken because there's so many apps. It's there's 2 million apps in the App Store, and so the average app could never get discovered. And app discovery is broken. And this is true, but it's actually working as intended because the average app is a piece of crap that doesn't deserve to be discovered. But then the good apps get discovered. If you make something really good and you stick it in the App Store, people are going to discover it and talk about it and know it. And with bots, it's actually going to be much worse in the sense that if there's 2 million apps, there will very quickly be 100 million bots. Within 2 to 3 years, there's going to be 100 million bots, no exaggeration. Because the bar for making an average bot is so much lower than for making it. It takes a few hours to make a shitty app, but you can make a crappy bot in 5 minutes. So it's going to be 100 million minimum.
Just 4 lines of code, and
or not even code.
Pull down those.
There'll be more bots than people at some point, and so the average bot is going to be there's going to be an enormous long tail of just useless crap, and there won't be.
And that's the optimistic view.
Which is what we're starting with right now. But
yeah, which is right, and we've already built some of that long tail. And how are you going to discover the good ones? Well, it's going to be it not as a ratio to all of them, like, because the total number is going to be irrelevant, and the good ones will be discovered because they'll be famous, just like people are famous.
Okay. So riff with me a little here, because in the past day and a half, one of the other things that came up was it's going to get harder to distinguish between when you're interacting with an automated thing and with another person. And as a matter of fact, you'll start out with an automated something that's powered by humans and that sort of thing. Do we have a responsibility to let people know what they're interacting with? And then we'll get into how you establish the bot meritocracy.
Yeah, I think it's actually just a short-term thing that there's any confusion. I don't think there'll be much confusion in the future, because I think the mistake people make now is they think that bots are, like, at some point going to approach being as good as humans. But that's kind of silly. I think bots are going to start at ridiculously better than humans and get better from there. So you won't be confused that you're talking to a human, because you'll be doing things that no human could possibly do. Like, it isn't that we're asymptotically approaching human. We are going to start at way better, and we're going to get even better from there for specific narrow use cases.
Okay, you had to qualify. Had to put some bounds on that.
Well, for what? Yeah. But there won't be any confusion. Well, I think in general it's good to think of use cases where, like, I prefer to think of bots, if you're going to ascribe personalities to them, I first think of them as like service animals than like humans. So think of a bot as like, a really well-trained sheepdog. Like, a sheepdog is like super humanly good at its skill, which is like herding sheep, right? It's like great. It's like far better than a human can ever be. It like knows what the sheep are thinking. It like runs really fast. It can like herd them directly. Or like a bomb-sniffing dog, right? Like, a bomb-sniffing dog is like really good at its job. And that's kind of how I think about bots. Like, they're going to be amazingly good at their job, far better than humans. You would never think that, like, oh, is that like a human TSA agent sniffing my bag, or is that a dog? Like, it's obviously a dog. They're really good at it, but they also have personalities. You can form emotional attachments to them. Like, they could be cute, they could be approachable, but you don't think of them as smart, right? They're like simultaneously brilliant, but also not smart. Like, you don't expect to like have witty banter with either the TSA agent or the dog. You just expect it to be good at its job. I think it would be the same way. So like, use cases are going to be, when you're talking to a support bot, it's just going to be really good at like figuring out exactly what's wrong with your Comcast box to get your service back up, like much better than a human would. And you'd be like, oh yeah, thank God I'm talking to a bot. Same thing with your, dental hygienist assistant bot. Like, it's just going to be really good at like figuring out what's wrong with your teeth or something. I think a lot of those use cases.
It's a manifestation of a lot of complexity, as Sarah was saying before. I mean, you have these personalities, and they will have the kinds of charisma that we're drawn to, and there'll be a TMZ gossip site for bots. And I agree that we'll be able to have a domestication model. We'll understand them as this coterie of pets around us. But indeed, what's going on is that they're just that visible layer of all the complexity behind it. So you've got these fields of social physics and reality mining. This is this idea that there's a lot of data to be gathered from everything in the course of our daily lives. But you can't present people with 10 terabytes of data. You present them with these character attributes that Phil was just describing. And so we'll have this tension always between the necessity to easily communicate, well, what's that entity that you're interacting with, and the inherent complexity behind it that Sarah was talking about.
I think I take like a slightly less philosophically sophisticated view, and perhaps not as a metaphorical view. And I actually just think, but I agree with the points made here. I actually just think that a lot of people like this idea of the magic curtain today, where you can't tell if it's like a human or a bot, if you're, for example, in the case of support, because they think that humans want humans, right? And like, I don't actually think that's true. I think, I think people will acclimate. Like, why do you mostly call phone support today? Because that tends to be the fastest way to solve your complicated problem, because you cannot find the information you want online, or because the automatic responses are wrong, right? And I think if you are I think we're going to actually be able to resolve those sophisticated queries with context really well, and then people will have no problem. Let's just talk about a few examples where you are actually happy to talk to a bot instead of a human. So, for example, there are about 1 billion people in China that like speak English, and then about like 30 million people in China who are comfortable like speaking verbal English, right? And if you ask why that is, like they study English in school, but there aren't native English speakers to interact with. And then if you are learning a foreign language and you never interact with a native speaker of that language, then you know you are not going to sound like a native speaker of that language, right? And so people who are good at it actually like basically watch TV and find people to talk to. But if you have somebody with the infinite patience and accessibility and voice of somebody who's an native English speaker available to you, and that actually causes a lower social burden and less insecurity to be like, oh, well, I'm just going to keep chatting with Phil because he's not going to make me embarrassed about like where I am in my learning. Like that's a great use case, right? Like people are going to be happy to talk to that bot. So I think that like I feel like that's a really simple, obvious example, but there will be many of those.
No, I think the language learning is actually a great example. I like it a lot. I actually just made a small investment in a language learning bot. I think the way to think about it isn't that it's going to be like as good as talking to a native English speaker. It's going to be much better. Like for the purposes of learning language, you would much prefer to talk to this bot than a native English speaker because the bot's actually just going to be much more effective. Like maybe not as generally intelligent, maybe not as like witty as someone who's a native English speaker, but also a human, but better for the narrow purpose of improving your pronunciation or whatever it is that the bot's going to do.
And I have great doubt that we're going to be able to create bots anytime soon, say the next 5 to 8 years, that are able to encode this tacit knowledge. The teacher-student relationship is one that is really hard to understand, and there's a lot of perception and observation that's happening that cannot be put into code. We know that pretty well. Also want to give a shout out to Mark Meadows. I don't even know if he's here right now.
He was here.
Was he here?
Yeah.
Yeah, Botanic. I mean, they're working on gurus, actual spiritual advisors that sit outside of you. Do you know it? It's cool, actually. They're working on gurus because each and every person gets touched emotionally in a different way. And it takes a long time for that guru to understand where those slippage points are, where those hot buttons are for you, in the same way that anybody who's really close to you. But you can establish this relationship, and like Phil was talking about before, you can domesticate a bot, starting with a kind of puppy, and then building it into a guru that might be able to help you along in a relationship. He's a cool guy to seek out if he's here.
Yeah, I don't know, like I kind of don't buy this. Like, I think a lot of us are very defensive about about humanity, about like at one point we were like, well, is AI gonna like kill all the humans? And like the reason we think that is because like
we're insecure.
No, I think it's worse. I think it's because we think the smart thing to do would be to kill all the humans. We're like, well, we're going to create something that's super smart, and obviously the smart thing to do is going to be to kill all the humans because we're kind of assholes. So I think part of it is just like guilt. So we can work on that. We can just like
the guilt
we can try to improve ourselves as a species so that like the super intelligent AI would like to have us around. But then at the same time, we're like really defensive about like these allegedly magical attributes that humans have that'll take forever for computers to replicate. Like I don't actually believe in either side of those. I think that bots could be far better teachers than humans in most circumstances because most human teachers suck. It's just like, it's handed down wisdom that's never actually been tested, that doesn't actually work very well, that has very poor outcomes, and you could do a far better job with a bot in many cases than with a human, obviously not at all. And at the same time, like, there isn't a giant existential threat to humanity either.
Yeah.
So I want to recommend a book if anybody hasn't heard of it. It's called The Most Human Human. And it's about I guess it's generally about this topic and the Turing test and like basically what humans are good at and what computers are good at, and like maybe a few things about sort of the future of AI as well. And a basic thesis of the book that's quite optimistic in sort of the other point of view from AI is going to kill us all is AI will enable people to do the jobs that they want to do and focus on the tasks that they enjoy doing, and that they're better at computers than computers at doing. So complex judgment and creativity seems like further afield than processing, large amounts of prime numbers or whatever. And so, like, we've known for a long time that computers are superhuman in many ways, right? Like, otherwise we wouldn't build them. But I do think that this whole sort of area is getting a little bit confused because now we can interface with them in more human-like ways, but it doesn't change the basic concept of like things computers are good at and things humans can be good at. And if the part that computers are good at expands, then like that should just free us up if we believe in technological productivity, right?
We have questions in the audience. Well,
This is
you
kind
first,
of
Dean.
this is kind of a mundane question, but I've heard a lot of people talk about how do we get really, really rich from bots. And what I'm hearing people say is that when there was a gold rush, the people that got rich were the ones that sold the picks and the axes and stuff like that, not the gold miners. So what's your thinking on that? I mean, do you think that there's more money to be made potentially in the underlying platforms and the tools, or in the actual bots themselves?
So I don't actually think the shovel makers got that rich. I think that's probably an urban legend. I think the people that got really rich are the real estate people, which are like always the people that get really rich. So what's the equivalent of that on bots is, I don't know, I guess you'd buy shares in the platform companies of where bots are going to live.
I just want to say I'm really enjoying this panel because it's the first panel that sort of opened up the social plane on this whole space. Nobody else has talked about social, so thanks for that. And so I'm really interested in hearing more about celebrity bots. And also, if we think about social, one of the sort of key lubricants for social is reputation. And I mean, you can apply this at any point in the ecosystem you want, like between bots and humans, or bots recommending other bots, and just sort of, have you seen anything that just starts to look like reputation or reputonics for bots and other aspects of social media as they relate to bots?
I haven't seen anything explicit that's convincing, but Darius Kazemi is a phenomenal artist who just creates hilarious bots. If you want your entire day to be lit up, I highly recommend following all of his bots. And it's not quite reputational scoring in the sense that you would want to see some standardization, but his bots have reputations for making people laugh in a certain way and get joy or insight in a certain way. And that just flows informally through networks of people. Kazemi, Darius.
So I'm gonna give an answer that I don't think I don't know how many people work for startups in this room, but startups won't like, which is the distribution here is still owned by the platform. So we're kind of just waiting for them to mature and figure out exactly how they want to control that, right? And so you see, Apple has done somewhat traditional things, offering messaging apps in a messaging app store. I think you will see people do obvious things and eventually non-obvious things over time, and maybe personality and character will matter, and you will have different distribution mechanisms, just like there isn't one mobile social distribution mechanism. We will get others, but I actually think that I do think that we're sort of relying on the Facebook Messenger and the WeChat and the Slacks of the world to say, here's the store, here's the promotion, here are the channels, as was evidenced by the announcement from Facebook yesterday, and here's how you're going to find these things. But I think reputation will be an enormous part, but as an investor in new companies or as a younger company, we don't get to determine the structure of that.
One last question.
You obviously are looking at this when you're looking at investments earlier than the market is. I mean, you're ahead of the market, right? Where do you see the landscape of investment right now? I mean, is it still pretty early, or is it locked in of where you think that whoever's going to be players are already tagged, or is this just the beginning from an investment opportunity and landscape?
Well, I think it's just the beginning. So I think that the technology moves in these 7-8 year S-curves, right, where you have some relatively slow period, and during this period a bunch of fundamental stuff is invented, and then the companies that start that power, the next 7-8 years of hypergrowth, and it levels off again. And, we're in the slow period right now. The last slow period was in 2007, 2008, and that's when everything was kind of slow, and you had the financial crisis, and the technologies that created the next level of growth from there were mobile and social, and so you had, Uber and Airbnb and Evernote and Dropbox and kind of all of the modern unicorns started during that time period. And I think that's what we're seeing now. I think like the fundamental technology during this slow period is AI, the basket of things around bots and conversational UI, and the next $1 trillion or so of startup market cap is going to be created by companies that are made during this slow period of 6 months ago to maybe 18 months from now. So yeah, I'd say we're at the first third of the beginning in terms of investment upside.
Do we have agreement?
So I think we look at a few different vectors of expansion. So Phil mentioned that people are like feeling kind of frustrated in startup land because mobile app distribution is broken, or at least very hard right now. That may be true, and this may be a way to distribute mobile services that isn't as broken. I think a bigger opportunity is just the idea that we have just started to figure out how to use mobile computing, right? Like in other countries, we see examples of stuff that could be the near future here. So in China, they call it online to offline. People have started to use that term here over the last few years, but why don't I have the context of what's going on around me all the time, right? Like, why can't I purchase things through a messaging application by scanning QR codes everywhere? Why can't I recognize all the people that are around me? Why can't I do automatic translation all the time? And why doesn't my messaging platform and my apps within it have all of that context? I think we're going to go through this massive transformation where we understand how to use mobile phones in the real world instead of just staring at them playing games all the time. Not that that's trivial,
Pokemon.
But this hasn't happened yet here, and it will continue to happen. And I think as everyone has talked about, I think the interface between businesses and consumers, just because that is already a conversation, and so you can see all of the opportunities there. And then I think a lot of it just looks like automation in many different fields, including just within your enterprise. And so if you think about where we are versus what the science says we are able to do in these fields, we are at the very beginning, and so we're pretty excited about it. Another way to just think about it is there is not a bot that your average consumer is really excited about right now. And so we certainly haven't hit that first inflection point, but I think it's coming.
Final word, Joshua?
Oh my God, final word.
Well, not, okay.
Just to address this point, I'm with both of them on this one. I mean, for the people in the world who are encountering mobile technology for the first time, they're making excessive demands of it in the ways that Sarah described. And I think that we're going to become more demandful as a result. And yeah, I'm with Phil. I mean, every day I get decks from startups of bots plus something that are searching for some traction in some area. And this is the beginning of the beginning, as Kevin Kelly says.
Well, let's thank this panel. This was profound and entertaining.